Hi, this is Gus Kowalski for AP Gov 5-minute review, in which we'll review Unit 2 of Political Opinion and Behavior. All right, let's get to it. So, political opinion in the United States. Since the 1960s, there has been a steady decline in the trust in government since the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal. And as of today, about 2/3 of Americans distrust the American government, although it did slightly go up after 9/11, but since that point has steadily gone down. Now, an important concept is known as political socialization. That is how you develop your political opinion. And the biggest role and influence is the family. So if you think about it, what are your parents' political opinions? Typically, you are going to share it. It is the biggest predictor. Other influences include linkage institutions such as the media. Certainly, that's going to impact one's views. School, and also the liberalization effect of college. And keep in mind that as your age increases, your party attachment as well as your political opinions are going to grow firmer. Again, that will grow firmer with age. So let's look at some of the demographics of liberals and Democrats. Typically, you see some of these factors here from being on the northeast corridor or on the west coast, coming from urban locations, young, Hispanic, blacks, etc., amongst other factors there, versus conservatives and Republicans, and they tend to come from the Southwest, Midwest, rural, suburban areas. They tend to be wealthier men, and especially evangelicals tend to be a major voting bloc there. Aside from liberals and conservatives, we also have libertarians. They support individual liberties to a much greater degree than what we've seen with the other two ideologies, and they oppose regulations and typically advocate for much less government. As opposed to socialism, which is going to advocate for the public ownership of means of production and exchange. You see this more in European countries, and they advocate for more government regulation and greater government involvement. Moving on, when we talk about political participation, we're talking first about conventional participation. This includes voting in elections, specifically presidential elections is the number one way that people participate in politics. Also working in campaigns, running for office, contacting elected officials. Versus unconventional participation in our political system includes protesting, civil disobedience, and MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., is perhaps the greatest example of unconventional participation. Now, with respect to polling, to get an accurate poll, you want to have a sample size of roughly 1,500 to 2,000, 2,000 being optimal. You want to use methods such as random sampling to avoid any type of error. And ultimately, using these two methods, you can get a margin of error of plus or minus 3%. Also keep in mind the way that you phrase polls and questions to people can also impact it. Polls are also used on elections, specifically exit polls. That's asking people as they're leaving the voting booth as to which candidate they voted for. Oftentimes with polls, the danger there is the bandwagon effect, where people jump on board because one candidate is leading the polls or one candidate is much more popular in the polls. So that is certainly something that polls can influence. With respect to voting, when we talk about voting, we mean suffrage. Certainly over the course of history, we have seen suffrage expand. That is very important to note. 15th Amendment for African Americans, 19th for women, 26th for the 18-year-olds to vote, no longer 21 at that point. And then you also have things like the Voting Rights Act, which is going to prohibit things such as literacy tests. Now, despite the fact that suffrage has increased over the past 200 plus years, there is still lower voter turnout. Some of the reasons include political efficacy, believing that your vote does not matter. Ballot fatigue. Sometimes there are a number of federal, state, and local elections. People get tired and they don't fill it all out. Apathy. Some people just don't care about politics, or they might just be disillusioned. The fact that elections are held on Tuesdays, not a great day of the week. Some places in the world have elections on the weekends, but in the United States, Tuesday seems to be the day. And then also bad weather can influence lower voting turnout as well. And then also with respect to voter turnout, typically the elderly, educated, the more partisan you are, stronger in your political beliefs. If you belong to a union, if you are female, or you are married, you are more likely to vote. With respect to those less likely to vote, if you don't belong to a union, if you are single, if you are male or you are younger, you are less likely to vote. One effort to increase voter turnout has been something called the Motor Voter Act of 1993, which was an attempt to sign up people to vote when applying for their driver's licenses. While it did increase registration, it did not actually increase voter turnout, so that did have mixed success. And then lastly, voter ID laws have come about in the South. Many of them have been seen to be unconstitutional and really the jury is out on voter turnout there. And that is your 5-minute Unit 2 review.